They have been trying to force me back by refusing me reinforcements and money. But now, they recall me no longer by indirect means, but in plain words. At this unlovely and shameful return of mine, it will not be Scipio who will be wild with triumph and delight, but rather my political enemies, whose only way of ruining me and my house has been by ruining Carthage. Hannibal reached Carthage in 203 BC. He was accompanied by 15,000 of his veteran soldiers. Men Livy described as an army toughened by hardships almost beyond human endurance, drenched 1,000 times with Roman blood, and carrying with it the spoils not of soldiers only, but of generals.
About a third of the army is made up of his veterans from Italy. The other soldiers in his army are relatively recent recruits. They are not as well trained, they are not as experienced as his veterans, and he is unable apparently to mold them into a cohesive whole like he had with his old army that had been in Italy.
A year after his return, Hannibal led his men on a 5-day march to the North African city of Zama. With the fate of Carthage hanging in the balance, Hannibal sent a message to Scipio calling for a meeting. Scipio accepted. Livy later wrote, "They were not only the two greatest soldiers of their time, but the equals of any king or commander in the whole history of the world." For a minute, mutual admiration struck them dumb, and they looked at each other in silence. Hannibal was first to speak. "If fate has decreed that I, who was aggressor in the war with Rome, and so many times have had victory almost within my grasp, should of my own will come to ask for peace, I rejoice at least that destiny has given me you and no other from whom to ask it."
Hannibal reminded Scipio of the power of fortune. He reminded Scipio that he, Hannibal, had been in a position just a few years before to force peace upon Rome, that he had been in the leading position, and asked Scipio to remember that you could never trust fortune, that the terms of peace were enough, that Carthage was defeated, there was no need to carry the war any further.
But Scipio rejected Hannibal's plea for peace. "As for myself, I am aware of human infirmity. I do not ignore the might of fortune, and I know well that all we do is subject to 1,000 chances."
He wanted the glory of victory for himself. He wanted the glory of a crowning victory over Hannibal in person to bring an end to this war. Scipio claimed that the Carthaginians were faithless, so that he was saying to Hannibal, "No, we have to defeat you completely because we cannot trust you."
Unable to come to terms, the two generals returned to prepare their men for war. With the Numidians now allied with Rome, Hannibal faced a cavalry superior to his own for the first time in his life. If he were to emerge victorious at Zama, he must depend upon the power of his elephants.
At the Battle of Zama, Hannibal sets up his men in 3 lines, supported by elephants. He now has 80 elephants. For the first time, he's got a large number of elephants in one of these battles.
So these he puts right out in front, and the idea is send these forward, disorder the Roman line, create chaos, and then come in with the rest of the army to follow up the attack. That's the idea. The problem is the Romans are ready for this.
Scipio had lined up his men to create separate channels, essentially, which would allow the elephants to go through. Usually the elephants are not going to trample on people unless they have no choice. And so the elephants run through the lines of Scipio and have no further effect really on the battle.
Both sides placed their cavalries on their wings, with 3 lines of troops in the middle. Hannibal positioned his less experienced men in the first 2 lines, hoping to wear down the Romans. He would save his battle-tested veterans for his final assault.
The cavalry of the Romans attacks the cavalry of the Carthaginians, and the Carthaginian cavalry is driven from the field. Now this either happens because, well, they are overwhelmed and are forced to flee, or because this is part of Hannibal's strategy. They may have wanted to drag the Roman cavalry off the battlefield and hope that these guys would chase the Carthaginians and would not be a factor in the battle itself.
With their cavalries engaged in heavy fighting on the wings, Hannibal and Scipio sent their massive armies out to meet one another.
This is where the battle will be decided. And as Scipio's men come towards the Carthaginians, again showing their new abilities that Scipio has drilled into them in Spain, and afterward, the three lines suddenly form into one continuous line with which to face the Carthaginians, and then the two lines come together.
The Roman army, the main infantry in the center, advance, engage Hannibal's first line, and cut through it fairly quickly. That first line of Roman troops is then able to go on and beat the second Carthaginian line without having to call on significant numbers of the second or third lines of the Roman army.
Now all that lay between the Romans and victory were Hannibal's veteran soldiers. The same men who routed the Romans at Cannae 14 years earlier. The time to settle old scores had arrived.
The battle goes on long enough for Scipio's cavalry to return from their pursuit to come in behind Hannibal's infantry, do to them what Hannibal had done to the Romans at Cannae, and then it's all over.
At the end of the day, more than 20,000 Carthaginians lay dead on the battlefield. Nearly as many were taken prisoner. From that day forward, in honor of having defeated the great Hannibal in North Africa, Scipio would forever be known as Scipio Africanus, the first Roman general ever to be named for the people he conquered. For Hannibal, surrender was the only option. Carthage accepted the terms demanded by Scipio. She would give up her claim to all the lands occupied by Rome, surrender her elephants and what was left of her fleet, recognize the rights of Rome's new allies in Africa, and pay Rome reparations for the war. The terms were not as harsh as they might have been, but Scipio lacked the manpower and time to destroy Carthage outright.
After the Battle of Zama, Scipio was faced with the fact that his command was about to come up. He wanted the glory both of having defeated Hannibal and of having brought the war to an end. So if he didn't make terms very quickly with Carthage, then his successor would be the one responsible for the peace.
Out of respect for his opponent, the victorious consul allowed Hannibal to go free.
If you brought Hannibal back as a captive and strangled him in the Tullianum the way you might do another defeated leader, the myth of Hannibal would be gone with Hannibal. He would not be this great evil genius who Rome had confronted and Rome had defeated. Not seeing Hannibal made him all the more potent a myth in the Roman imagination.
Hannibal returned home to Carthage. The last chapter of his life was about to be written, and much to the surprise of the Romans, the great general would rise yet again. With the end of the Second Punic War in 201 BC, Hannibal returned to Carthage. 5 years after his homecoming, the weary soldier exchanged warfare for politics and was elected chief magistrate.
When he comes back into Carthage, people were clearly willing to make some space for him. They clearly respected his accomplishments. They saw him as a leader. Hannibal was plainly an extraordinarily intelligent man, a man who could inspire great loyalty from people around him.
Hannibal shifted his focus from winning wars to ridding Carthage of political corruption. He enacted numerous reforms, and within a few years, the war-torn country paid the first installment of the huge indemnity owed to Rome. According to Livy, this payment caused much weeping in the Senate at Carthage. Hannibal allegedly laughed while his countrymen wept. Rebuked by a senator, Hannibal lashed out. If eyes could see the mind within as they do the expression of a face, it would soon be apparent to you that this laughter you condemn springs not from a happy heart, but from one which is almost beside itself with misfortunes. The time to weep was when our arms were taken from us, our ships were burnt, and we were forbidden foreign wars. That was when we received our death blow. You have no reason to believe that the Romans had any interest in your domestic peace, for domestic peace can never stay for long in a great country. The same political enemies who clashed with Hannibal in the Senate would soon betray him to the Romans.
They send their couriers to Rome and start spreading rumors about Hannibal's renewed intentions to fight against the Romans, how he will once again become their most feared enemy. And the Romans have to do something about it.
Carthage resurgent is bad enough. Carthage resurgent with Hannibal there is terrifying.
When Hannibal received word that Rome had dispatched 2 envoys to arrest him, he fled Carthage, never to return. He sought refuge in Syria, where King Antiochus was locked in his own war with the Romans. Antiochus wasted little time naming Hannibal his chief military advisor and commander of the navy.
The requirements of naval warfare were completely at odds with the Hannibal who controlled the psychology of generals against whom he was fighting, who would choose his own grounds for battle very skillfully. In naval warfare, your ground was chosen for you. All that was Hannibal was lost in Hannibal the Admiral.
The Romans soundly defeated Antiochus and demanded that Hannibal be turned over to them. Again, he fled. He would live the rest of his life on the run.
Once they do start to chase Hannibal down, then they're not going to stop. The Romans are terrified that Hannibal, this man who hates them so much, this genius of a commander, is going to come back at them with somebody else's army.
The Romans finally caught up with Hannibal in 183 BC at the court of King Prusias of Bithynia. With Roman soldiers closing in, Hannibal realized too late that he'd been betrayed by the king. This time, there would be no escape. His last hours were spent in his bedchamber. It was there that he mixed the poison that would take his life. Let us ease the Romans of their continual dread and care, who think it long and tedious to await the death of a hated old man. Like his father Hamilcar, Hannibal had chosen suicide rather than dishonor at the hands of his enemy, denying the Romans their ultimate victory.
Hannibal had, I think, a great sense of himself. He was not going to allow himself to be humiliated at the end of his life. And he was, at that point, a very old man. He was in his 60s at the time that the Romans came for him in the court of King Prusias. And he wanted to die with his honor intact.